You noble diggers, all stand up now.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to my channel. Nanya returns. Today we will be talking about an introduction to left-on-left violence. I got a question, I intend to answer it. It was about, can you explain these leftist positions just a little bit, right? Sometimes I get off to the races and I go too fast and I don't realize that I'm going too fast. I encourage anyone to reach out with a question. No question is too slow, no question is too basic. I will answer in good faith. So what I intend to do is set out from the center the leftist positions, what my position is, and then the competing claims of all the positions. The first thing to keep in mind is that there are many fewer positions than is publicly imagined, right? That probably like 7 would cover all of the leftist positions. So what we're going to be talking about today is those leftist positions. And where I start with the first leftist position is the Social Democrats. I'm going to flash here the political compass that includes the American spectrum, and you'll notice Bernie Sanders is the only one who even barely crosses the threshold of being a leftist. And I think because of his genocidal Zionism that he is obviously right-wing, right? And that he believes in some kind of exceptionalism for Jewish people to commit genocide and do what they will. And so that makes him right-wing, no matter his empathy with the poor and working class people. So the first position, the closest you can get to the center as a leftist, is a social democrat. That means you don't want to have a revolution, but you would like the conditions of society be much kinder to the average working person, right? That's a social democrat, no revolution, right? Democratic socialists, flip, social democrat, no revolution. Democratic socialists, small revolution, right? A revolution of the mind, a revolution in parliament, right? Where you vote and a new governing organization is put in, right? The Swedish Nordic model is often pointed to here, right? The far left critique of the Nordic model is that it relies, obviously, on the exploitation of the global south and maintains a living standard that is too high for the average to be called a socialist, right? You must obviously be hypocritical in your view of the world in order to maintain that kind of view. The next position is what I call Antifa, right? This is not a positive belief, but it is a coagulation of people who are otherwise social democrats or democratic socialists, or even liberals who are, by the material conditions of encroaching fascism, just pissed, right? And so they are not for something, they're against something, right? The 3 arrows, maybe I'll include it here, is anti-monarchism, anti-Bolshevism, and anti-fascism, right? So they equate Bolshevism with fascism, right? Which is just laughable. No Bolshevism has ever conducted a genocide. Never, right? No Marxism has ever conducted a genocide. The next position over is called the anarchists, right? The anarchists are followers of people like Kropotkin and others, the conquest of bread, right? They believe that power corrupts and that it must be kept from men. The problem with this is that it's naive, right? It's naive in the extreme. How else does society run but with power, right? What happens when there's a legal dispute over a bit of property between two people in an anarchist world? Are we immediately back in the feudal world? Because that's what it sounds like, right? Do we go to independent courts? What if I like my courts and I don't like your courts? Right? It's not a system. It's why the left, the true left, calls them anarchides. Right? Anarchist children, anarchides. And that brings us to the real left. there were only two serious leftist positions: the Marxist-Leninists and the Trotskyists. The Marxist-Leninists are the Stalinists, right? Stalin was smart enough to not name his ideology after himself and just instead said he was being orthodox to the ideas of Lenin and Marx. So to break it down into the core belief, right? Since the positions we had before that were socialists, right? They wanted a socialist utopia, but they weren't really willing to be revolutionaries over it, right? Communists are revolutionaries. The position of Marxist-Leninists is that there should be a vanguard party that seizes control of the government on behalf of the workers and then leads a transformation to a worker socialist state, right? So China doesn't claim to be socialist. They claim to be state capitalist, but for socialist ends and by a communist party. Do you see the difference there, right? I hope that breaks that down slow enough. So the positions that fall under Marxist-Leninism are Maoists, Dengists, Sankara, the Pan-African stuff that he was doing. These are all Marxist-Leninist positions, right? They wish to take control of state power and then use it for socialist ends, right? This is hardly different from the Trotskyist position, but what I believe to be the more intelligent position, which is the advancement of permanent revolution, right? The immediate conversion of state apparatuses into democratic apparatuses, right? The workers and soldiers councils are the historical example of this, right? That there would be councils locally everywhere that controlled a lot, right? And they would be selected by the Politburo, but from the working class vanguard itself, right? Not a vanguard self-selected, but selected, right? There would be, sergeant majors and chief craftsmen, people who were proletariat, but who were chiefs among their people, right? And they would make the decisions in this huge, broad scale. Obviously, I have empathy for this Trotskyist position, but I'm a syndicalist, right? And a syndicalist technically isn't a communist position, right? And it also only really is different from Trotskyism by saying that soldiers are too reactionary to be on these councils and that workers should run the world themselves, right? That the soldiers don't need to put the input and that workers are already bloodthirsty enough. Another Trotskyist position is post-Sadism. Trotskyism is always following his own writings, right? He wrote what is called the law of uneven but co-equal development, right? Which predicted that the imperial core of the imperial machine, right, which is not one nation but the West, right, will always have a periphery that advances in a sluggish manner compared to the rest of the imperial core, right? And so at that time it was Russia, right, which was a feudal, backward state that was ripe for revolution, right? That because of the reactionary medieval Christian lens that they had as their official state policy, that whenever revolutionary fervor grasped an intelligentsia in Russia before the revolution, they instantly went to the most modern and most revolutionary thing, which was communism at that time, still is. Keys to remember here is that of the leftist positions that you can objectively call left, only two are serious, right? And there is a major debate and schism between them on who's right about how the world should run. Marxist-Leninists are the only ones who have had success on a global stage, but also the Trotskyist critiques seem to ring true, right? The state Stalin set up, despite the heroic accomplishments that it achieved, did succumb to the predictions that Trotsky said, that it would become a devolved bureaucratic worker state, and that eventually it would be absorbed by the forces of reaction. Right? It doesn't mitigate that Stalin beat the Nazis and that maybe Trotsky wouldn't have, right? But I think he would have. I think Trotsky was a world historical genius, but that's all counterfactual, right? It's all what we don't know. What I do know is that Marxist-Leninism was real socialism, and it did liberate hundreds of millions from poverty, and it did teach them to read, and it did slash infant mortality, right? And what you need to remember is that there are only two serious positions, and you remember this by saying, who would have killed Rosa Luxemburg, right? And that's a reference to the German Revolution in 1918, 1919, when German workers at the end of World War I rose up and tried to put communists in charge, and the monarchists and imperialists sicked these veterans, these PTSD-ridden veterans on them and murdered thousands and thousands of them, right? But Rosa Luxemburg was a woman who was among the leaders of this movement, right? And she was a very kind-hearted person, and she would have been a great leader. But the question you have to ask when you're doing left-on-left violence, right? When you're doing an inner family matter, right? You have to ask, would this person kill Rosa Luxemburg, right? Would they sell them out to the state? And if they're not a communist, right, and they're a socialist, the answer is yes, they would sell out Rosa Luxemburg to the Kaiser, right? Or to President Trump in this day, right? And that's why jokes like AOCIA really hit, right? Or Zoran Mamdani being a CIA asset. It rings true because we have these historical examples, right? And to finish this, I want you to always keep in mind this one fact, right? We're being pushed into this left-on-left violence. I, as a syndicalist, historically, should really hate these Marxist-Leninists because I know I'm right and I know they're wrong just by a little bit, right? But by being charitable and saying, look at all you've done, but you still failed, I'm trying to engage with a friend, a brother in good faith, right? To the right, start smacking people around. But in the left, in the greater family, there are rules of engagement, etiquette, right? And you have to remember that the CIA is pushing this factionalism, that they want us to split up into greater and greater sects, right? These atomized sects. So I'm going to leave you with a joke. What do you get when you leave two leftists in a room together? 3 breakaway parties. Have a nice day. Hello, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you. This channel has one mission: to prevent civilizational collapse associated with climate change, to prevent 100 million refugees by 2035, to stop 7 billion from starving to death by 2075. And we will do this through one main vehicle. We mean to unite the Anglosphere. We will do this by convincing the Commonwealth of His Majesty King Charles III to apply for statehood as one. And then with this new power, we will be able to negotiate in good faith with the rest of the world on how to tackle this crisis. Thank you and enjoy.